Have you ever seen the Windows Trusted Installer account? Maybe sometime in the past, you've wanted to remove some programs or applications that you felt like you didn't need or didn't want on your Windows computer. So you'd navigate to the root of the file system, // maybe dig into the program files where you can see all the programs installed. And say if you wanted to just manually remove one of these, hey, rip it out and try to delete something like Windows Media Player as an example. If I were to try and right click and delete this, I'll get an error. It says you need permission to perform this action, and you need permission from the Trusted Installer. You could try this over and over and over again, but you still need permission. And you might be thinking, what the heck? Look, I'm the administrator. It is your computer after all. And I'll show you. If I were to take a look at who am I, I'm just John. And look, I'm added in the local group administrators. We could take a look. I am in fact an administrator. So what the heck? Why can't I remove whatever software I want on my computer? Even if you were to try and escalate your privileges, like if you were to go beyond administrator and use some tools in like the sysinternal suite, like psexec, if we wanted to try and have an interactive session for the command prompt, cmd.exe, we can agree to the end user license agreement. Oh, I'm not running from a high privilege PowerShell session, so let me run that one more time. Here I'll copy and paste this syntax just so we have it. I'll open up another terminal. I'll right click to run as administrator to make sure we have all the permissions that we can, even running this, firing it up as system. I'll make this text a bit bigger so you can see it. If I were to move to that program files directory, and if I tried to delete everything, we can even use the /F flag to force the deletion of files for Windows Media Player, and I'll say, yes, I'm totally sure, but access is denied for absolutely everything. But if I were to take a look, there aren't any other users on this computer. There is no Trusted Installer. So you might try to do some research. You look around on the internet, Google, and see, hey, how can I become the Trusted Installer or get permissions to be able to delete those files and do what I want on my computer? There is actually a really interesting thread over on Reddit. It's actually hysterical, if I may say. This individual asks, look, I want to become the Trusted Installer. I want to have actual access to all the files on my computer. And honestly, if you look through the comments here, these are just hilarious. This one says, listen to me, do not do it. If you don't know what you're doing, you'll destroy your Windows installation. I've done it before and I regret it. Just use a take ownership command or whatever. And you can take a look at the responses, but this is hysterical. They just go off and go crazy. Normal person doesn't like to reinstall Windows every effing day. It's up to you. You're just wasting your time for no effing reason. A Trusted Installer is a deep system file. Well, it's just the files and programs that Windows installed along with the operating system and doesn't want you to tamper with them. But you can. And this just turns into usual Reddit cesspool armpit of the internet, and people just go crazy. I won't spoil your fun here. I'll put a link in the video description if you'd like to read through these comments, but it's like, hey, if you tried becoming NT Authority system, that should bypass 99.5% of restrictions. They're like, how do I do that? And they say, he's lying to you. There's no such thing. Yeah, email the CEO of Microsoft. But if you pull yourself out of Reddit and continue your Google search, you will find this awesome blog post from James Forshaw, way back when in August of 2017, and this is an old trick. It's been refined, there's been a lot more research out and about on this. James Forshaw is a genius over at Google Project Zero, and he wrote about this. He says, if you've spent any time administering a Windows system post-Windows Vista, you'll have encountered the Trusted Installer group, which most system files and registry keys are ACL'd or access controlless to. Like if we were to look in Windows System 32, you'll notice that only the Trusted Installer can delete or modify files. Not even the administrators group is allowed, just like we saw. And the whole owner is Trusted Installer, so you can't do anything or change the security either. If we were to go back to our Windows Media Player as an example, or even like Windows Defender, if you want to try and rip out the default antivirus, if we were to go take a look at the properties, we could see in the security tab, just as it was alluding to, take a look at the advanced section, the owner is the Trusted Installer. Now, if we look back into the blog posts, and I'm not saying that you should do this, like some of the sentiment from that Reddit thread, but you can do this, and it's interesting for a little bit of research. If you wanted to know, look, what is or where is Trusted Installer? It's not a user or a group, but it is some of the access control lists. And we could actually interrogate that and check it out with PowerShell. And we can even try to follow along. Back inside of that NT Authority system shell that we have open, I'm just in command prompt right now, but if I were to dig into PowerShell, I could try to get ACL on that Windows media player directory. We can store that as a variable, just as they did, just ACL. And if I wanted to take a look at the access, just as they showcased, there are a ton of these, but look, if I were to drill that down to where the identity reference will match TrustedInstaller as what we are looking for, we could see that TrustedInstaller is all that's present. That's what we filter down on, but that's the one with full control. Now, James explains that this is referenced as an NT service, which means it's a Windows Service SID. If you'd like to get a little bit nerdy here, they link the Microsoft documentation, and that showcases a service security identifier. Digs into some of the structure syntax in C and C++, and all the stuff that that's made up of. But that does mean that it has a unique identifier. It's actually something that could be generated on the fly as like the SHA-1 hash of the uppercase version of the service name. For example, you could generate that. You could calculate the actual SID with all this PowerShell syntax. We could copy paste that if we wanted to see it in action, but you really don't need to do that. NTDLL, some of the dynamic link libraries, some of the functions and functionality of the Windows operating system, and the Win32 API calls, you could actually use RTL create service SID, and LSAS will just convert a service name to a SID and vice versa. Here, we'll just slap in that syntax. I'll paste all that, and there is a big long SID. Okay. That does mean, though, that this is based off of a service. So I could actually use the PowerShell commandlet to get service, and TrustedInstaller is really what we're looking for. That is, in fact, a service. Right now, it is stopped. You can see that over here, but if we wanted to use TrustedInstaller or do anything with it, we would start the service. The blog post showcases this with the sc utility or the service control command. That is sc.exe. You'll need to note the .exe file extension when you're inside of PowerShell, because otherwise PowerShell will think it's like the actual alias for set content. That's another commandlet, right? Granted, that's an alias when you use just strictly sc. If you wanted to get alias sc, you can see that is referring to set content. So be very careful if you're in PowerShell. Make sure you include that .exe if you use the old command prompt binary. But let's get all the details that we can from that TrustedInstaller service. So let me pipe that to format list star, or I like to use the aliases there, FL asterisk, and that will give us a little bit more of the details. And actually, super quick, let's use that old school command prompt binary, sc.exe, remember, to query the config with QC for our TrustedInstaller service, and that'll tell us that the binary that it actually fires off, the application that runs, is C Windows in the path servicing and TrustedInstaller.exe. Now, if we were to start this service, we could see it in action. Let me just use the start subcommand here, and that should get the thing moving. Start pending. Now we can use something like Process Explorer from the sysinternal suite once again, and I'll run this as administrator so we can get all the privileges and permissions that we should have, and we can go take a look at that TrustedInstaller.exe that's running. With Process Explorer open, we can scroll down until we find our TrustedInstaller executable, or we can just hit TR on our keyboard and try to jump to it. And with that, we can take a look at the properties. Now, just as you saw, we move over to the Security tab. In the groups here, we can see that TrustedInstaller is the owner with the SID that we were referencing earlier. What that means is that this process is running with the unique Windows token, and that token is carrying the security properties, and that is actually going to enable it. But how can we become TrustedInstaller? How can we take that token and use it for ourselves? This is the interesting tidbit, and actually another video that I've showcased on trying to delete or remove Windows Defender and cut off the antivirus, nuke it from orbit, and kill it so you can do your security research with like malware analysis in a virtual machine, yada yada yada. It's not always something you can easily do. In fact, in that video, we like boot into safe mode so that we can borrow TrustedInstaller's capability and then use it to clear, delete, remove those files as we wanted to. But turns out you could still do it from just a running instance of Windows. James showcases it with this setup here. He discusses how you might be able to maybe add your user to the TrustedInstaller group, but LSAS APIs like the net local group add members group doesn't actually take a SID. It takes a group name, and you can't really use NT service TrustedInstaller because it's not a real group. What you could do, though, is actually just try to swap out the binary rather than using that C Windows servicing TrustedInstaller.exe. What if you just had whatever command that you wanted to run? He showcases that again with that sc.exe, modifying the configuration for the Trusted Installer service where you set the binary path to be whatever you want, cmd/c, maybe deleting a file in this case. So if I were to get back to our command line in the terminal here, I know I'm still in PowerShell, but let's use that sc.exe old school command one, and let's actually stop our Trusted Installer service in case that's still running. Good. Now we could modify it, configure it, and change it to whatever we want. We'll change our Trusted Installer bin path, and you got to be very careful here to include the equal sign and a space following it. I know my face is in the way here, but make sure you include that space. And with that, we could use whatever command that we really want. Can we run a program in the foreground though? They were using like cmd/c to delete a file. Could we create a file with that? Oh, and this command prompt that I'm in doesn't actually word wrap around on the next line, so I'm gonna break out of this one and then just move into another prompt where we should be able to word wrap just fine. There we go. So let's just try to echo anything into like a test file in C, Windows, temp, and we'll just call it test.txt. I'll hit enter on that, and that succeeded, setting the configuration, but now we'll need to actually start the service to see it run and do that in action. Well, if it work here, it errored, but I'm curious if we have our file. Let's go take a look. If I actually dir c Windows, temp, and test.txt, it exists, it wrote it. It has 11 bytes too. So let me try to cat that out. There is our word anything. Okay, so we could write files and just have a one-shot capability to act as Trusted Installer. Let's try and validate that we are in fact the Trusted Installer though, as we're running this command in that one-shot sort of service syntax way. Can I use whoami/groups and redirect that to our little testing file, c Windows temp test.txt. Let's see if we can then start our Trusted Installer instance. Fire it up. That will error, at least in the message that responds, but it should still work. Let's try to cat out our C Windows temp test.txt. That has no output. Okay. But the file was modified, so maybe we're getting some syntax stuck in the way. I wonder if we can tweak that just a little bit and make a more flexible command for us. It'd be nice to do stuff with PowerShell, right? So let's use tac-c from PowerShell following the cmd/c of command prompt. And I think we can actually use set content, just like we were alluding to previously, with the path being c Windows temp test.txt. And let's set the value to be the output of whoami/groups. And then just to make this a little bit easier for us, let's use let's make this all one command, sc.exe, to then start our Trusted Installer. And will that work? Config succeeded, and let's see if it worked. Let's cat that out. Ooh, look at that. Okay, we have all this output, and if I were to actually open this up in like Notepad or a text editor here, look, we've got our NT service Trusted Installer in our output. We are, in fact, the Trusted Installer. Let's keep playing with this, though. If I wanted to, could I just fire up a graphical user interface program as Trusted Installer? Like, can I open up Notepad? If I were to actually change this to run notepad.exe rather than cmd.exe, I'll hit enter, I'll have that succeed and run, but the start command doesn't seem to be doing anything. It's a config change succeeding, but the starting isn't working. What's going on? And let's take a look at our Process Explorer. We can fire that up one more time, and let's go see, do we have Notepad running? Notepad.exe is running. Oh, it actually looks like it got a response back there, and Notepad just died. Can I run that again? Yep. Okay, spawned Notepad. Take a look at the properties. It is Trusted Installer as the owner, but it's not displayed anywhere. Like you can see in the taskbar, I don't have Notepad open or visible on the computer. So what's it doing? Auto start location was HKLM registry local machine system current controls services trust installer, and the parent is services.exe. So everything would be as we expect. So seemingly we cannot run any GUI or graphical user interface like a program or application that would spawn a window like Notepad or Calc or whatever, but we can run whatever command that we want. We saw that with our cmd/c, and we were even able to use the PowerShell tidbit, and that actually gives us a little bit more power because you can use tact-enc or like an encoded command to pass in some base 64 encoded syntax. That way you could get around, I don't know, running into quotes or double quotes or whatever other syntax shenanigans you might run into. I think that this is pretty neat though, just a little bit of a trick, and apparently another reason this works is because TrustedInstaller is not a protected process light, or PPL, one of those processes that Windows just won't let you tamper with. Which is odd, because that TI group is given special permissions to begin with, and able to stop and delete PPL services. James had pointed this out to the Microsoft Research Center, and so did Alex Ionesco back in 2013. I guess they didn't do anything at the time. I'm not sure if that had changed, since they would pretend PPL isn't a security boundary with whatever, you know what they say, UAC, user account control, not a security boundary, blah, blah, blah. Problem is, though, you'd have to restore the TrustedInstaller service to the original state. Otherwise, things like Windows Update will get unhappy really quickly, and of course, you wouldn't want to leave behind those breadcrumbs, artifacts, fingerprints that you made those changes if you ever did this on a red team, pen test engagement, whatever. So could we not just use the token that we've seen, that security privileges, with the correct groups, just trying to start a service and borrow or steal or take that token to create a whole new process and impersonate it? That is what we will do next, but first, let me say big thanks to the sponsor of this video, Black Hills Information Security, Anti-Siphon Training, and all of the incredible tribe of companies put together by John Strand. Now, you might be familiar, I've showcased and chatted about them before. In fact, in a whole lot of other videos, we've dug into some of their pay-what-you-can training. If you take a look at their website, even their pay-what-you-can training, you could literally get whatever course you might like to dig into cybersecurity, learn a ton of this stuff for whatever price tag is approachable, affordable, and accessible for you. They've got a ton of incredible stuff here, like Security Operations Center core skills, active defense and cyber deception, a little bit of packet decoding, Wireshark, MITRE attack framework, regular expression, so much stuff. And even more awesome stuff, some of the intro labs for the introductory courses and classes have the material just out and about for free, available for you on GitHub. This is John Strand's GitHub and his intro labs repository. You can see if you want to dig into the navigation. We've showcased this in a couple of other videos and gone through a whole lot of that material, but if we dug into the navigation, look at all this awesome stuff here. Linux command line, memory analysis, weblog review, Wireshark, Rita, Nessus, Deep Blue CLI, Velociraptor, Elastic Agent, so much cool stuff, all available for you with the link in the video description. And if I may squeeze in just another sweet tidbit, they have a whole card game like Backdoors and Breaches to roleplay tabletop exercises and incident response with physical cards to play a game like Dungeons and Dragons, or you can do it all online. There's a URL, play.backdoorsandbreaches.com, and they have a ton of incredible simulations, exercises for you to talk through with your team what you might do in a doomsday scenario with incident response and tabletop exercises. They also have these awesome, incredible expansion packs. In fact, myself over at Huntress, we've done some cool stuff there. If you want to go play with it, you could dig into all the sweet stuff. And if in the Backdoors and Breaches game you wanted to call a consultant, like hey, phone a friend, get some assistance from someone else to bring in their perspective, you can call a consultant for some industry folks. And if you wanted to click that button in the Huntress expansion deck, there's me. You can pull up me in your deck, get that into your hand at John Hammond and My Ugly Mug, and I think that's a little neat. So thanks guys, and big thanks to our sponsor. Check him out, link in the video description. But let's get back to the blog post and see a better way that we could become TrustedInstaller rather than this one-shot little service configuration tweak. We are running as the administrator in this case, right? We're trying to make these changes and see this all in action. So we've got the SE debug privilege capability. So we could just open up a process and impersonate their token. Can we do that just as easily with the TrustedInstaller process? Now, James goes through this and showcases with one of the PowerShell modules you could set up and actually use to play with tokens and other sweet process thread capabilities in Windows. He actually references this up above at the beginning here. He notes that, look, if you wanted to, you could use this with PowerShell and the Entity Object Manager module. So if you haven't heard of that before, it's pretty cool. Let's go check it out. Trying to Google this, you can find it on the PowerShell gallery and the GitHub repository to dig into the source code. This is coming from from Google Project Zero, along with a lot of their other incredible tools, so it's pretty sweet, but super easy for us to download and work with. All it takes is installing the module NT Object Manager, and we can work with this syntax. Back in our PowerShell command prompt, let's just go ahead and paste this in and fire it up, get it installed and ready to roll for us. Yep, I'm totally cool with trusting it. I think Google Project Zero will do okay to work with this here. Just enter the letter Y to say yes and get this all staged and set up. And with that, we are ready to go. Now I can import module NT Object Manager. And no errors, we're good. Just to get us back to kind of a clean slate, I will go ahead and use the service configuration executable to set the config on our trusted installer back to the traditional binary path for C Windows servicing TrustedInstaller.exe. And now we're back to as it should be. So I won't drag you through this little intermediary step here that James showcases, where he actually sets the NT token privilege, one of the commandlets coming from NT Object Manager that we just set up. He actually starts the service as usual, gets the process object, opens a token, and then tries to pull out and validate we are in fact getting a token with the Trusted Installer group, having it be enabled and set as the owner. With that, he says, cool, now we can do whatever we want. But okay, starting a Win32 process, actually using the token, that $T variable, the object we passed through. If it tries to impersonate, look, it gets pretty bloody, it errors. The problem is we don't have the permissions there with that token. Can't seem to create a new process or impersonate the token because we only have the token query access. We usually just need token_duplicate to actually get the primary token. That's needed to do impersonation. If you wanted to dig into this in Process Hacker, you really don't even have read control to see it within PowerShell, but you just don't have that access. So how else could we get around this? Well, this is explained just a little bit more because you'd think, oh, SE debug privilege, usually that lets you do whatever you want because you're the admin after all, but SE debug privilege only bypasses the security checks on process and thread objects. It doesn't do anything on tokens like we're working with right now. So what else could we do other than break and destroy the service binary like we just saw? There are a couple tricks you could try, like using psexec to actually stage a whole nother service, but again, if you're just messing with the services, you could just modify the trusted installer service to begin with. You could end up creating a whole new process and actually setting the parent of the process be TrustedInstaller.exe. The NT Object Manager, that PowerShell module that we just downloaded and set up, actually makes this pretty easy. You could use other commandlets, new Win32 process, and pass in the parent process parameter, where it just lets you do that, and you could grab the process with that simple commandlet and just stage it all super easy. Since we've reset our Trusted Installer service to use the regular TrustedInstaller.exe program, let's go ahead and start that Trusted Installer. And now we can use our getNT process and actually try to grab the TrustedInstaller.exe. That returns for us, and we could actually store that as a variable. We'll use $P, and that's staged and set up there. Now we could set a whole new process. We could store this as a variable just as well. We use the commandlet new Win32 process, and we'll spawn cmd.exe. We'll set the creation flags to actually be a new console, and we can specify the parent process to be that $P variable for TrustedInstaller.exe. I'll hit enter there and take a look. We fired up the command prompt. Can I run whoami/groups? And there it is. You might be able to see it just there. We are in fact running with the NT service Trusted Installer group in action. That works. Now we've spawned a whole new command prompt. If I wanted to, we could take a look. Windows Media Player, maybe that's a fine example. If I put these side by side, here I'll have our Windows Media Player directory here. If I go back to the command prompt, I'll try and delete my Windows Media Player. And if I really want to delete it, I'll hit yes. Fingers crossed, it just goes away. I think I could more cleanly spawn PowerShell, and I'll still have all the same privileges. Because again, it's a parent, right? So Trusted Installer is still here. Now I could rm, recurse, and force Windows Media Player or Windows Defender, and fingers crossed that'll just blow the whole thing up, and it's gone. And that works. That's fine. That's becoming Trusted Installer with a whole new process and a command prompt window that we opened. Of course, you could spawn Notepad or Calc or whatever other graphical user interface program, something with the window that we hadn't been able to do before, now super easily with this setup. But wouldn't it be neat if we could steal those privileges, take that token and use it in our current shell and session, like within the running PowerShell window and service that we've already got? That is what the next portion of the blog post covers here, and he showcases, look, you could actually use the NT-impersonate thread API call. That is an undocumented function, by the way. If we want to go Google that, trying to do our own research again, hey, this is an NT API undocumented functions resource, and this is all the sweet stuff. You could see, hey, someone else in the community has done a little bit of that reverse engineering analysis and been able to track that down. So we can use the NT-impersonate thread API call to capture the impersonation context from an existing thread and then apply it to another. The way impersonation contexts work is that the kernel will try and capture the impersonation token for the thread first. If there's no existing impersonation token, it'll take a copy of the primary token of the process associated with that thread and impersonate that instead. The beauty of the NT-impersonate thread API, like setting the parent process, is that it doesn't require permission to access the token. It just requires thread direct impersonation access to a thread that we can get due to the SE-debug privilege capability that we do in fact have. So we have these steps. We can open up the process with at least this access capability, and then open up the threads with that access capability that we have, and then call that NT-impersonate thread to steal that impersonation token. Let's try and demo that super duper quick. Let me close out of this process that we started for cmd.exe that has the Trusted Installer group set and staged for me. But if I go back to my original command prompt here, this PowerShell session is the one that has the NT Object Manager module imported. So what we could do is let's restart the service for our Trusted Installer to get a clean slate here. Let's grab that process in the variable $p to get that ready for us. And then let's set a thread object to be that getFirstThread function out of that process. Now we can see our th variable staged and ready. And then we'll grab the current thread of the currently running process. So we can call that variable $current. We'll set that to getNtThread for our current process with a sudo handle, apparently. We'll hit enter on that. And then we can try to impersonate, where our current thread will impersonate thread, given our th, we'll include that, and our impersonation token should be getNtToken tac impersonation. Fingers crossed. Now, do we actually have an impersonation token ready and working for us? We do. So let's take a look at their groups. We have them. And then do we have our Trusted Installer group? We do. Excellent. Now, even in the running PowerShell session that we're in, if I were to put these side by side once again, we'll move our program files over here. And now I guess let's nuke like Windows Mail. So I'll try to delete tac force, and we can use tac recurse on Windows Mail in this case, or Windows Defender. You blow up whatever you want. I'll hit enter, and now that's gone. Obviously, deleting stuff is just one use case of being Trusted Installer, but that's like full access, even higher than system, apparently. As long as something else doesn't set the main thread's impersonation token, you don't do anything else in a separate thread, then your PowerShell console will act as if it has that Trusted Installer group enabled. Pretty sweet. So all in all, big shout out, big kudos. All of this is obviously James Forshaw's incredible work. And of course, there are obviously more ways to get that Trusted Installer token than just what's covered here. There's plenty of research on this. Again, this article is from 2017. He goes on to explain that Vincent Yu over on Twitter said, look, you could just use get system with Metasploit to do that just as well. If you get a system token with set TCB privilege, you could also use these other API calls, logon user XXW or LSA logon user, or you can specify any other additional groups to apply to a service token. Plenty of other API calls you could tinker with, and that's pretty sweet. And if you were still Googling around, you might very well have even seen a whole nother article from James just as well. It says The Art of Becoming Trusted Installer, the Task Scheduler Edition. Another way you could do this, an article he wrote in 2019. And of course, there are tools to be able to do this. Here's one on GitHub from Fafel1 with a utility, run as Trusted Installer. Run a program as Trusted Installer. This is all tools that you might be able to do this, even a graphic user interface to make that easy for you. Down below, he includes some of the references and little thanks to see other tools that this was based off of, and even the background context for the same article. And more discussion here. If you want to dig into any of the code, even for what came from in our NT Object Manager, again, that's all on GitHub. We could scroll through it, but it's a ton of those sweet API calls. Obviously, this is oftentimes used in the conversation of disabling Windows Defender or killing other anti-malware solutions. This was just one showcase with Undefender as the capability. And of course, tons and tons of folks have already been chatting about this for years. There is another blog from 4Core, No More Access Denied, I Am Trusted Installer. This is relatively recent, 2023, but they walk through the exact same process that we just saw over in James Forshaw's blog posts, and everything in this case, they're trying to delete everything for Windows Defender in C program files. They walk through everything that we've already just discussed here, showcased it all previously, and big kudos, credit where credit is due for James Forshaw and his blog posts, everything they've already covered. I think theirs is kind of neat though, because they offer this as a Golang library and showcase it. Look, if you wanted to see this with some of their utilities, libraries that they've built out, they actually have WinToken, a Go package to try and steal Windows tokens or enable disable token privileges and do some other sweet stuff. So that's pretty neat. If you wanted to do this in Golang and play with some other that just as well. Look at that syntax. It's Golang, so I mean, it is what you'd expect it to be, but I'm digging it. And they've got that built out as a proof of concept just as well, if you wanted to see that on GitHub, all in Golang. So pretty sweet that they've got that there. You can do this in Golang, you can do this in C, and with that NT Object Manager library from Google Project Zero, you can do this in PowerShell just as well. So super slick, super cool. I thought it would be a neat thing to show you. I know it's a little bit old and dated, but that might answer the question of what is the Trusted Installer account? Who is Trusted Installer, and how could you steal those privileges for yourself to do some damage, wreak havoc, do whatever you might do. Thanks so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed this video. Like, comment, subscribe, all those YouTube algorithm things, and I'll see you in the next video.